All right. Welcome all who are seeing this either live or on the recording. I'm really excited to be here with you today and bring you information that I think is very life-changing. And I learned about radical remission several years ago. I read the book, and there are now two books, and we'll go through all of that. But I really connected with the research and the insights gained inside of that research, and so desperately wished I knew this several years ago. But instead of worrying about what I wish I knew, I was sort of fueled with a passion and desire to bring this forth to others. So that's where this all came about. And so I have recently become certified in this, and we'll kind of go through this. It will not take the full hour, but it will be engaging, and it will be intentionally curated. So you at least get a general overview and then a little bit of a deeper view on one of the 10 healing factors. And that will make more sense as we go along. But to start with, for those of you who don't know much about me, I'm actually a clinical pharmacist by training. So for several years, over a decade and a half, I worked as a clinical pharmacist, working alongside healthcare teams and managing high-risk medications. I then became a private patient advocate in 2017 after I helped my father through his year of lymphoma and saw the medical system from the other side, and decided to take that shift and move into that field and career. And I still keep all of my pharmacist licenses, but I don't work in the trenches of pharmacy anymore. I also became certified as a meditation teacher. And most importantly, the reason that you're all here is I'm a certified radical remission workshop instructor and health coach. That's a lot of titles. What's most important is I'm a human just like you are. We're all just trying to figure this thing out called life, and in the most peaceful way. How do we navigate life in the most peaceful way and achieve optimal wellness and pull in external answers and opinions, but more importantly, find those answers and intuition within? So what I would actually like to do before we continue is just to take a moment and just kind of ground. I realize that this is a, for the East Coasters, it's a lunchtime sort of time of day, and that can be, maybe we had a chaotic morning. And then for anybody else who's on a different time zone, there still may have been some chaos that led you before this to now. So I feel like it's always helpful to just take a minute to sort of ground and reconnect with our intentionality behind coming to this type of an event. So let's just take a moment and we'll just close our eyes. We won't take long here, but I just kind of want to ground, start to connect to the breath. The breath is always a great anchoring place to start with. It connects us to our bodies, but also to our space, our surroundings, and the present moment. And as we stay anchored and connected to the breath, you might notice any areas, head to toe, that might feel tight, maybe a little tense. And that includes small muscles like those around your eyes, your cheeks, also larger muscles, maybe shoulders. Just bring some permission to soften and release those areas. And with the next few breaths, just connect to your intention for coming here today. What inspired you, intrigued you? And then also maybe set an intention for what you would like to get out of this session today. And of course, just expressing gratitude to yourself for taking the time and space to join us and to learn. Take 2 more deep breaths here. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. All right. Welcome to Kim. All right, we just talked a little bit about who I am, and we did a short just grounding meditation. And now we're just going to kind of head into some of the information, the background information on what radical remission is, what it means, why we're here learning about it, and what intrigued me. So the background on radical remission, the founder is Dr. Kelly Turner. She is a PhD focused in on research. Kind of backing up into her own background and what led her to this passion is she actually lost two very close people in her life to cancer. She lost her uncle, and she also lost a best friend of hers in high school. So her best friend was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 14 and then passed away at the age of 16. And so that, of course, very understandably was traumatic for her, and also left a very tangible impact on her life from what cancer is, what it meant to her, and how it affected and impacted those around her and ultimately her. So fast forward a little bit, she ended up going to Harvard and focused her studies on psychology and screenwriting. She ended up, through volunteering and through her interests from her childhood, counseling specifically patients in the oncology world. And through that, she started to learn about what we now know as radical remission cases. And what that means is some type of a turnout or outcome that is statistically unexpected. So that could mean somebody who was diagnosed with cancer and did not proceed with conventional treatment and ended up in remission. Or it could mean somebody who was diagnosed with cancer and proceeded with conventional treatment, did not go into remission, then sought out alternative routes and did go into remission. So there are various examples of what this might look like, but in the medical world, it's statistically not what we expect. And so she just became very intrigued by what is happening here, and why aren't we hearing more about this? What is happening? What are these people doing that is different from what others are doing? And how is it impacting them? And why aren't we reading about this? And why don't we have a platform for more of these stories to come forward? So she asked her professors if she could proceed with her PhD, which she ended up doing at UC Berkeley. And she focused in her research on radical remission cases, specifically looking at over 1,500 cases of radical remission around the world. So she went to all kinds of places. She went to Zimbabwe, she went to New Zealand, Thailand. So really kind of no stone left unturned to really just find out what's happening with these cases and how are they different. She ended up asking many oncologists throughout her research if they had seen radical remission cases as well, and they all said yes. She also asked them if they had published those cases, and they all said no. And what she found was that many of the reasonings that she received was because they didn't want to give people false hope. And in doing so, this information just wasn't getting out there, either in the medical literature or from people in our conventional medical system sharing it. So she ended up publishing her first 15 years of research in the Radical Remission book, which is what you see here on the left. That was published in 2014. And then a follow-up Radical Hope book was published in 2020. Really great books. If you haven't read them, I highly encourage you to. They're not difficult reads. There are lots of, she is a researcher. So this is all based on lots and lots of research, and she does include lots of studies. So this is not, opinion or conjecture. There is a lot of foundation and basis to this. So I definitely do recommend the books, but I will, of course, through this session today, share as much as I can with you so you have a better understanding. What she basically uncovered was 10 common healing factors. So when she looked at all of the cases across the world of these radical remission stories, there were a variety of things that everybody did, actually over 75. But what she focused in her books on were the 10 that everybody did. So the 10 common healing factors that every single person who she studied participated in some way. And we'll go through what those 10 are. It's really important to note that she is adamant that she is not against nor am I, against conventional treatment, meaning these books and this research are not intended to be anti-chemotherapy or anti-radiation. In fact, many of the radical remission patients, studies that she did, utilized conventional treatment. And so it is important to note that that's not the purpose of her information. And also that these are not conclusions. It's not a treatment protocol. It's not intended to take the place of any medical advice. And there's no guarantees that if any specific person follows all of these, that they too will achieve remission. But what it does is gives us an abundance of information of what people have been doing and what we now have in our power to start controlling within our own lives if we are facing a diagnosis, and even if we aren't, because quite honestly, this is valuable information for prevention as well. Also, lastly, it's intended to help all of these factors, and we'll go through all of them one in detail, are intended to help boost our immune system, ultimately help give our bodies what it needs to help heal in the way that it knows already how to heal, without medication-related side effects. So it's a much different approach than conventional treatment, but it can be and often is utilized alongside conventional treatment. So here are the 10 healing factors. I'm not going to keep you hanging much longer on that. I'm sure you're all wondering, what are they? And here they are. They're having strong reasons for living. We're actually going to go through that one in a little bit more detail. So I'm not going to spend much time in the overview section on this one. But second is empowering yourself. So basically becoming the CEO of your own healthcare, no longer being in the back seat or even in the passenger seat, really empowering yourself to have a voice in your care. Changing your diet. It's very important to note that this is not intended to specify any specific diet. So it wasn't that all of the radical remission patients ate a keto diet or a paleo diet. Rather, there were small changes that they made that were across the board. So they drank filtered water when they could. They ate organic foods when they could. They limited their intake of meats and sugars. And so there were just changes to the diet that are not labeled as any specific diet. Herbs and supplements. Now, I know I mentioned before, these things are intended to not be harmful, but only helpful. Now, the herbs and supplements part, it's highly recommended, and everybody in the radical remission stories worked alongside somebody who could guide them with this. So it's really important, especially as with somebody with a pharmacy background, that this is done under the supervision of somebody who knows how to guide you with herbs and supplements. But all of them across the board utilized a practitioner that guided them with herbs and supplements tailored to their own health cases. Increasing positive emotions. And this doesn't mean being Pollyanna all day long. In fact, the reality was, for many of the radical remission cases, they fit in 5 minutes a day of some type of intentionally positive emotion. That could have been laughter, maybe just watching a stand-up comedian or laughing with their family, gratitude. So some type of an inclusion in their day of intentionality around positive emotions. Releasing suppressed emotions. So oftentimes people find themselves with a background that maybe needs to be worked through, and sometimes often with a psychotherapist maybe, or some type of other specialized therapist. So this could be trauma, this could be anger, a lot of different types of emotions that we might be dealing with that aren't always addressed when we're dealing with illness. And so it's important that we address those. Following your intuition. So this includes even knowing how to tap into your intuition, which for many of us, that might be new. And so knowing how to listen to our inner wisdom and then also follow it when we do hear and feel into those messages. Increasing social support. I think that speaks for itself. I think we all know, especially through the pandemic, how important isolation can be to illness. And so it's really important that people find those social support connections. Spiritual connection. This looked different for everybody because in different areas and different cultures, this might have been something more religious in nature. For others, it might have been something more spiritual. So it wasn't that everybody meditated for hours a day. Oftentimes it was, if you're a Christian, it was, connecting with church members and, maybe being in prayer groups. And for other people, it may have been more meditative practices. So this was not necessarily one specific way, but everybody had some type of a way to connect spiritually. And then finally, exercise and movement. And this wasn't everybody went to CrossFit. This was whenever somebody was able to, they engaged in some type of movement, even if it was gardening, even if it was just walking down to the corner of the street. So these were the 10 healing factors that were discovered in Dr. Turner's research. Everybody who had radical remission cases took part in some way all of these factors. And so the intentionality behind the books is to teach us more about how we can do these things also, whether we are facing a diagnosis or we are just working on preventing a diagnosis. So let's dive a little bit further into the one that we'll be diving into today, which is strong reasons for living. It's a really, really important one, which is why I'm including this one today, and the others we can talk about at another time. But the intention here is to realize not just how much we want to fight death. So having strong reasons for living is actually much different than avoiding or running away from our mortality. This is more having a zest and a joy and a passion for life. And those two sort of approaches to living actually have a very different effect on our physiology and biology. So when we look at the fighting death or running away from death approach, we're actually in sort of this low-level cortisol fight or flight state, very sympathetic nervous system state where we are actually suppressing our immune system. So if you think about it, we are fighting death, but our body doesn't really know what we're fighting. It just knows that we're fighting something. We're fighting our diagnosis, we're fighting death. And so it's ready to fight with us, very much like we are running from a bear, right? If we're running from a bear, our digestive system is slowing down and our immune system is slowing down because we are putting all of our energy towards the fight. And so physiologically, that's what's happening internally when we are in fight mode. In opposition to that is having a zest, having a passion, finding joy in life actually puts us in a parasympathetic state. So physiologically, we are now able to rest and digest, and our immune system is boosted because of the shift in our body not feeling like it needs to fight something. And so when we talk about strong reasons for living, that's the focus, is the zest for life. What things, what people, what reasons do we have to get up in the morning and want to live another day? And that was one of the 10 healing factors. Like I said, Dr. Turner really focuses a lot on studies in the literature, and she specifically highlighted for this healing factor a study that showed that depression definitely affects our longevity. And one of the studies that she mentioned was published, I believe, in 2011, and it looked at patients with metastatic breast cancer. And I think it was 120 or so individuals. They looked at either putting these depressed individuals identified as depression either into the psychotherapy group or no therapy, not looking at medications, but just looking at people who got therapy and worked through their depression with a therapist and those that didn't. And the difference at the end of the study was actually a doubling of survival time. So we know, and this is just one of many studies, we know from studies that depression has a significant impact on our longevity and survival. And one of the important parts of a diagnosis of depression is what's called anhedonia, or a lack of desire to do things, a lack of passion, a lack of zest for life. So working through this and re-identifying and reconnecting with our reasons for living is super important. To highlight this, and for every factor, Dr. Kelly Turner always likes to highlight a story, but also what's important is to highlight that all radical remission survivors utilized all 10 factors. So even though I'm giving you an example with strong reasons for living, he also, the individual that we're going to talk about, also did all of the other 9 factors as well. So for this example, and I'm actually going to show a little video in a second, but for this example, this is Glenn Sabin, and he actually has given us the authorization to use his story, but it's also very public, and he wrote a book. So there's certainly nothing secret about it. But Glenn in 1989 was at the age of 28 facing chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is typically a condition or a cancer of the elderly. So it's usually found later in life. It doesn't have a great prognosis. It definitely didn't have a great prognosis at that time. So in the late 1980s, bone marrow transplants were sort of just coming to the scene. They didn't have really great responses or success yet. And so when his doctors were giving him the option of this new bone marrow transplant that may or may not help him, but likely will hurt him. He didn't really feel super confident in what was being offered to him. His prognosis was very poor. In fact, they basically told him there wasn't much hope, but he might be able to extend his life with a little bit with a bone marrow transplant. He decided to take matters into his own hands, and his reasons for living were that he had just gotten married. So he was excited about his life ahead with his wife and also building and growing a family. So he had very strong reasons to live, and that propelled him into utilizing all the other factors and seeking out other options. And so this is a picture in 2015, but certainly he is still doing very well. I think it was 2012 or 2013, his Harvard doctors did another bone marrow biopsy, and there are no leukemic cells at all to be found. And he never went ahead with conventional treatment. Again, it doesn't mean that the Radical Remission Project is against conventional treatment, but it's highlighting these stories and the ways in which that they healed themselves. I'm going to go ahead and share a little snippet of his video. Let me just get to my other screen.
I was with my family, my entire nuclear family in Linda. Here I was, 28 years young when I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, an incurable cancer, an incurable leukemia.
I remember getting a phone call from him. He was crying, which makes me want to cry. And he said, I'm going to die.
My primary care physician contacted my father, who was also his patient, and told him Glenn has chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and I would give him about 6 months to live.
So Glenn was a young man, and he showed up, and he was absolutely angry. And he didn't want to believe that at his age, this was a death sentence.
I knew that I wasn't going to just watch and wait, and I wanted to be more involved in my own self-care. So I went on a journey to learn as much as I could about the things I might incorporate in my lifestyle to create, overall the healthiest person that I could be, who happened to have a diagnosis of chronic lymphocytic leukemia. In the summer of 2003, for the first time, I started to feel the full force and effect of the leukemia.
His disease had gone wrongly. He had been seen at Hopkins, and they told him the same thing. I said, Glenn, sometimes we have to play medicine. She said no. Said no. And then he decided that he would come to me not as a treater, but as a credible assessment.
I just had this little experiment going. I was this, N of one. I really wanted to test my body and my mind to see how could I impact where I was at.
He's asked me to write things. I said, no, Glenn, I didn't do any science. I can attest to one thing. What you say about yourself and the stage of your disease is absolutely correct. The second thing I can attest to is you did it your way.
It started to be a significant change in my blood chemistry to a point where the blood counts were completely normal.
Glenn is the most extreme type of patient who basically decided he's going to engineer his own solution. Can you spontaneously remit to chronic lymphocytic leukemia? The book says no. Whatever magic he did, his disease disappeared. So every time I've staged his disease, it got better every time.
7 years since I was able to clear my marrow of leukemic cells, so a complete and durable remission. The idea is to become the most inhospitable host to cancer possible. And you do that by strengthening your immune function. You do that by working on getting into the strongest emotional shape that you can be in, and utilizing nutrition and physical activity and clean hydration and restorative deep sleep.
For me, the lesson that I learned is anything's possible.
We don't take anything for granted. We're grateful that we continue living a healthy lifestyle that will hopefully, keep me in a good place for a long time.
So that's Glenn's story. You can actually read more about his story. And he mentioned N of 1. For those of you who may not be super familiar with what that means, when we talk about medical literature or, any type of studies, N is the number of people, participants. And so N of 1 means I might be an anecdotal story. I might be an anomaly. I might be just the one person, but it's important that the story gets shared. And so that's what his intention is with his book, but you can also go to glennsabin.com if you want to learn more about that. So let me get back. We're actually going to do a little exercise. So if you have the ability to get a piece of paper, we're going to do a little exercise. It won't take very long, but go ahead and get some paper. If you don't have access to paper, you could always just use the note, like notes on your phone or notes on your computer. That would be fine as well. We'll go back here. So what we're going to do is, like I said, this is helpful to do regardless of where you're at, otherwise completely healthy, or if you're actually facing some type of a health condition. So this does not require there to be some diagnosis, but it's impactful. Even Dr. Kelly Turner does this twice a year for herself. So we're going to spend just a few minutes on part A, and then we'll do part B. But part A says, imagine that you have perfect health, $20 billion, and are guaranteed wild success in whatever you do. And the emphasis here is on wild success. So anything you could think of beyond your wildest dreams, any success you could think of, you're guaranteed that. In that scenario, which for some of us might be hard to even wrap our heads around, but in that scenario, how would you spend the rest of your life? Being sure to describe, relationships, work, what are you doing for work? Are you traveling? So just kind of letting your imagination run wild. So if you have perfect health, all the money in the world, all the success in the world, what would you be doing? What would your life look like? And so we'll just take a few minutes here to jot that down. The second part of this, or part B, might be a little bit more difficult, or maybe not. And it might be more emotional, or maybe not. But if you haven't ever done something like this, it can be very impactful. So the second part, and you can either use the back side of that piece of paper or sort of draw a line and start another section, is imagine that in exactly 1.5 years, you will die unexpectedly without any prior symptoms. Your financial situation is the same as it is now. How will you spend the next 1.5 years? Again, describing what your relationships look like, your work, your hobbies, your location, and travel. financial situation the same as it is now is in reality not related back to the part A. So your current financial situation, but imagining that you have 1.5 years left to live, how would you spend those years? Specifically thinking about relationships, work, travel, etc. And you may want to take a little bit more time after the session to really dive deeper into these 2 questions. So feel free to continue that afterwards. But from what we've done so far, the key then is to look at your 2 lists. Part A, where you had all of the money in the world, all of the success in the world, and part B, where you were potentially facing a mortality in 1.5 years with your financial situation as it is currently. What on those 2 lists were the same? So maybe it was traveling. It may not have been to the same place. So maybe you might have traveled somewhere more exotic and far away in A, and in B, maybe somewhere else, but travel was consistent. Or maybe a specific person or relationship was consistent with the 2. When you identify the similarities between the 2, those are oftentimes at this moment, and that's by redoing this, every 6 months or so, or more frequently, can be helpful. But when you identify what's the same on both, those are typically where people start to identify their strong reasons for living. And like I said, no matter where we are at in our health journey, this is really impactful to do and to start really honing in and focusing on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions or discussions anybody wants to engage in regarding this. If you have any questions about either this factor or the other factors that I did not go over in detail, or how this research began, I'm happy to entertain any of that, or something completely not any of that. And I know a few people had some technical issues. So this is being recorded. If you want to come back to this, we certainly can. If you're not in a place right now that doing that exercise felt accessible, you will have ability to watch the recording and do this at another time, which may be better for you depending on where you're at.
Hi, Claudia. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Kim.
Hi. This was really great. I'm actually driving. So I've been listening while I'm driving, which is also why I'm not on video, so I'm not distracting. But like, that was I was just envisioning as I was driving and you were talking. And yeah, it was really great. And I would love to sit down and like just write it out. But my kids definitely were on both of those lists, you know, spending time with them. But I think this is fantastic. And you know, me like my mind goes all over the place. I have a couple of dear friends that are battling cancer right now, and I just, even though I'm not battling that, having this information and knowing these things are so important, I think, to be able to just share with others. So I love what you're doing, and I appreciate what you're doing. And just wanted to tell you I'm engaged in listening. I'm just driving, so.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate you being on, and I definitely appreciate you sharing that. And even though you're driving, and that's commitment, right? I mean, that's when we really are connected to hearing this message, when we will do it even when we're driving. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the fact that you were able to, you know, even start to envision what those answers might be if you were to sit down and actually write them out. So really impactful. And yeah, I definitely encourage you to do it in written form when you get somewhere where that's safe and you have the time for it. But thank you. Thank you for being here. Anybody else have anything they want to share, or insights or questions? All right. Well, I don't want to keep anybody longer than they need to be. I know this is lunchtime for many of us, and probably a busy time for all of us. So I really appreciate you all coming. If you have any, and I have my email here, let me just go back to this in case any of you want to contact me after this. But if you want to hear any more about this, I now do workshops with this and also one-on-one coaching with this information. And so if there's any desire to know more, that's my email, claudia@peaceadvocacygroup.com. You're welcome to reach out to me anytime. You're so welcome. Thank you all for coming. I know there were a few, like I said, that had to hop off and had technical issues, but this will be recorded and shareable. So you're welcome to come back to it. And I will get the link to recording out to everybody who signed up. So thank you all for joining me and for sharing in this passionate work. And I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day.